Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for TAI's Legal Tech Roundtable. For those of you I may have not met yet, my name is Molly Ross. I'm the Vice President of Operations here at the Technology Association of Iowa. No shock to you all, topic of conversation as of late has been all around AI, and appreciate those of you who have been longtime participants of our Legal Tech Roundtable and brought this topic to mind to discuss AI with this group. Because I know we do have several new members or participants on the call, I do want to take one quick minute to highlight sorry, I'm going to mute you there real quick. Sorry. One quick minute. If you have not participated in this group before, I encourage you to check out the Legal Tech Roundtable, as well as a number of other roundtables and committees that we host on a regular basis here at TAI. You can look into those and sign up at technologyiowa.org. Without further ado, I know this is a hot topic of conversation, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions and engagement. So I want to turn it over pretty quickly today to Peter Stockburger. He's our leader of today's conversation. Peter is the managing partner of the San Diego Dentons office. He leads the U.S. Artificial Intelligence and co-lead of their Global Autonomous Vehicles department. With that, thank you, Peter, so much for joining in. For those of you attending, we do hope to make this conversational and engaging for you all throughout the presentation. I know Peter's plans to take a few opportunities for questions as he works through. So please do engage. If you have questions throughout, you can also throw those in the chat and we'll get to those as we take breaks. So with that, I'll let you take over, Peter.
Thanks, Molly. Appreciate it. And good to be here. I appreciate the invite. As Molly indicated, I'm going to be leading our discussion today really about what it means to responsibly use AI in the legal profession. And I use that word responsibly because that is the buzzword that regulators, lawmakers, bar associations are beginning to use around AI. How do you engage with AI in a responsible or trustworthy manner? So a little bit of an outline of what we're going to go through. I want to first just tee up for you the landscape. What is the promise and peril of AI for legal professionals? What is AI? What are the tools that are out there? What are the use cases that lawyers and legal professionals are starting to use AI? I'll give you an outline of what the current legal landscape is in the US with regard to using AI at the federal and state level, and then also what your ethical obligations are as lawyers, as legal professionals in using AI. And then we'll get to, well, what's the answer? In my view, the answer is maximize opportunity, mitigate your risk, build a responsible governance program. So I'll give you some examples of what that looks like, and then do a deep dive into what it looks like in an actual operation, specifically around contracting with vendors who use AI. And as Molly indicated, please chime in the chat with questions throughout. I'll also pause throughout the discussion to see if there's any questions from the audience. So don't be shy. So first, to look at the landscape of AI tools that are out there for the legal profession, I think it's first always important to just get the AI terminology right, because there is a lot floating out there about AI. AI as a technology is not new. It's been around for decades, and it really is basically a machine process or a computer program that augments human intelligence, adds predictive capabilities or new perception. All of us as legal professionals have been using Lexis and Westlaw for years. That's a form of artificial intelligence. You type in your search, it pulls up case law. That's using machine learning to pull up the most relevant searches based on the search terms. That's all AI. Subsets of AI. So AI is this umbrella term. We then have machine learning. Machine learning is a subset of AI where the programs are actually looking for relationships and patterns in data. So it's a deeper set of AI, looking at broader sets of data, looking for patterns and relationships. And deep learning is a form of machine learning that basically tries to mimic the human brain. It's layers of AI working like a neural network, communicating with each other through different layers. What we all are hearing about today, what's got the headlines, is this new form of AI called generative artificial intelligence. And these are new AI models, generally referred to as large language models, or you may hear frontier models. And these are models built from decades of research that can essentially, in real time, analyze trillions of data points and come back in virtually real time to generate text, audio, video, synthesize data, find patterns in recognition, analyze over 100,000 contracts in a second, and identify inconsistent clauses. It's a remarkable technology, but you can imagine all the legal issues that get generated with that much data, that much analysis. And to give you a sense of where we are on this trajectory of AI for a second, because I think this is important to put it all into context, we are at the tip of the iceberg with regard to AI and its development. This generative AI wave is nothing compared to what AI will be in a year, in 2 years. And we are in the area that we refer to as artificial narrow intelligence. These are very specific tools that can perform very specific tasks very well. And artificial narrow intelligence is really where the generative AI, Alexa, Siri, that's where all of this sits. When you go onto these AI companies' websites and you look at the research, everybody's trying to move into the next level, which is known as artificial general intelligence. This is where the AI will actually be indistinguishable from interacting with a human being. There will be rational thought. There will be weighing of options. There will be consideration of ethics. And this is what we mostly think about when we think about AI from the movies, this machine that is indistinguishable from a human, and what does that look like? And then ultimately the actual trajectory of AI, because AI is on an infinite acceleration path at this moment, which is kind of hard for us to wrap our mind around from a technology standpoint. We've never actually seen it. AI continues to improve and self-improve. And so the trajectory of AI is artificial superintelligence, which is AI that surpasses human understanding. And that's the AI that causes folks to worry about, nuclear weapons and pandemics, because the AI actually learns how to make itself better and it learns how to be more efficient. So that's what happens in Terminator 2 when Skynet takes over, is Skynet figures out, well, human beings are the problem, and that's ASI. We're a far way off from ASI. However, AGI, experts believe we're 10 years off, maybe 5 years from artificial general intelligence. And the reason why this matters is because the AI today that we deal with, let's say you're using ChatGPT or a new tool or Westlaw, these are siloed networks, siloed tools. But the future of AI is going to be increasingly networked tools talking to each other in the background of everything, and eventually this ecosystem of smart AI agents on our devices, communicating, pulling data, making recommendations that we're all going to be dealing with. So the big picture, the global challenge around this is, how do you regulate technology that is on this path to surpass human understanding and will be self-governing in the background of everything? Big question. Big problem that a lot of governments are wrestling with. And the real challenge, just on a big picture level, is that we are moving in a direction where automatic doors are a form of AI. It's a program to open and close when you step in front of it. Right now, we are in this autonomous stage where we're starting to see autonomous vehicles, autonomous robots, AI start to become independent. Where it's going to go is where it's actually thinking like a brain and like a neural network. So how do you actually regulate that? And this is just a quick plug for a white paper we released in July. If you're interested in reading it, I recommend the 8-page executive summary. It is like a 75-page white paper, so it's a little dense, but we basically break down this problem and look at what future regulation looks like. So that's just to give you a sense of, there are a lot of big discussions happening at the global level about how to harness this technology. But bringing it back to our discussion today, what does it mean for legal professionals? Well, what it means for us is that there's a boom of commercial tools coming on the market that have remarkable capabilities. And the promise of these tools is that it will make our lives easier, increase productivity, and free us up from the annoying tasks of practicing law. Now, I'm a bit skeptical about that. I think it's actually going to mean that we're all going to work more because we'll be expected to do more quicker. But what we're seeing on the marketplace right now generally is you're seeing this explosion of chatbots as a first piece of technology. We have OpenAI's ChatGPT, which is like the OG of these chatbots that came online. Google has Bard, Meta has what they call Llama, Anthropic is a big company. They have Claude AI, which is a chatbot. and Bing's tool is actually pretty useful. In addition to these chatbots, which you can use on your phone and your computer today, and I'm gonna actually show you an example of what Bing does. There are these enterprise tools, and this is where I think a lot of the marketplace is going, and that you're going to see more of as legal professionals. These are tools that sit on top of your data as an organization, and you can query, you can use IBM Watson X or Microsoft Copilot to say, I want to analyze what's the best contract we've ever written for a real estate company that's got a really strong indemnification clause. Instantaneous pulling up of the document, giving you a recommendation on which one is better and why. Remarkable tools that can generate information and text, draft discovery, draft contracts. These enterprise tools are really gaining a lot of attention. Adobe has one called Sensei. ChatGPT now has an enterprise tool. GitHub actually is one of the more prominent tools for coding. There was a study that came out that showed people who are programmers for companies are seeing 80 to 90% increases in efficiency, because you can just type into Copilot, I need a code that does X, Y, and Z, and it drafts the code for you based on open source code. So really remarkable tools. And I wanted to show you an example of what Microsoft Bing looks like. So earlier today, I was saying, well, how do lawyers avoid legal risks when using new AI tools? And this is publicly available on the Bing website. You can just go on and play with it. And it shows you in real time how fast it responds and gives you actually very detailed answers. This is just a text generating chatbot. And Microsoft actually puts in footnotes for you now, because there's a big discussion about, well, what's the source of this information? You see a lot of Wikipedia in the footnotes. So, as lawyers, we have to take that with a grain of salt, but it's a very interesting tool. I used it the other day because I was trying to research whether there were any state financial privacy laws at the state regulatory level. And instead of going to Westlaw, I just went on to Bing and I said, which US state has the most restrictive financial privacy law? And it spat out to me a code of the Vermont financial regulations that would have taken me forever to find on Westlaw. It wasn't accurate in terms of what it told me, but it was a jumping off point. So you can see where the benefit of this tool comes in. But I also wanted to show you what Copilot looks like, because this is something that you're going to hear a lot about. Microsoft Copilot is this enterprise tool that they're releasing to the public on November 1st. And the cost of it, I believe the last time I saw, was $35 a month per user. So if you have Microsoft Office 365, it's a layer on top of 365. And I'll show you this video. It doesn't have any tech audio. It just has some music, but it shows you what Copilot is capable of doing. Let's see. So this is a tool that Microsoft is banking a lot on. I've seen a couple demos of it, and it really is remarkable in terms of what it can do. But it shows you that it's this type of enterprise tool that has a lot of people interested. Now, the devil's in the details on Copilot, and this is just to give you an example from a legal professional standpoint. I was analyzing Copilot for a client who wants to deploy it in a healthcare system. And so of course, you start digging into the Microsoft terms and conditions, and you get to this breakout, and this shows you how Copilot works. So up at the top left corner are your apps, your Word, Teams, PowerPoint. And as a user, you type in the prompt. So for example, in PowerPoint, in that video, it said, generate a 10-page presentation on X, Y, and Z. What happens is that prompt goes in, and then it comes down on the bottom left-hand through Microsoft Graph. And this is a program for Microsoft that basically taps into all your data. And this is where the devil's in the details, because if you don't want Peter in HR to have access to the accounting spreadsheet from finance, as a user, as a company, you actually have to go in and set controls, set permissions on all the documents you want Microsoft Copilot to access. So there's a lot of back-end work to be done by IT teams, by privacy, by security, by legal, before Copilot can be released. Now, once Microsoft Graph accesses that data that there's permissions to, shoots back to the large language model that's powered by OpenAI. This is the unique relationship that Microsoft has with OpenAI. They can use OpenAI's massive computing power, but they're not tapping into any of the ChatGPT data. They're not tapping into data that's out on the internet. It's just your data, and then coming back to the user with the response. So I know it's a busy slide, but I just wanted to show you that the back end of this is complicated. And as legal professionals, you have to know how it works in order to sign off on that MSA for Copilot. Now, in the legal industry, we're seeing very unique tools actually come to market. Thomson Reuters and Westlaw is announcing generative AI coming to Westlaw Precision. I get an email probably daily from them saying it's coming, it's coming. I still haven't seen the tool yet. Lexis has a new AI tool. This is generative AI built on their research platforms. Co-Counsel is like an AI legal assistant. Harvey's a big one. A lot of firms have actually announced that they're going to deploy Harvey. It's still on a wait list, but what's being advertised with Harvey is that it can generate discovery, contracts, write documents, all based on prior templates. So basically the idea is in your database, you may have 1,000 discovery responses that your litigation team has built. Harvey would be able to draft responses using all of those prior examples. Now, the key is you always want a human being in the loop here to review, but you can see the promise of these tools in terms of productivity. One last video I wanted to show you for just on the legal tool side is this is a company called Kira. And this is just, I'm not endorsing any of these tools, but I just want to give you a sense of what these tools are promising and how it's going to shift the practice of law. This is a tool that allows you to do a lot of contract and document review.
Legal teams across the world are working smarter. Instead of spending countless hours drowning in the fine print of contracts, they're using artificial intelligence to review and analyze them in minutes. Every hour saved is now spent wisely, closing deals, building new business, and delivering value to clients. That software is called Kira, the award-winning contract review and analysis AI. Kira is trained by lawyers to find hundreds of clauses and discrepancies across due diligence, lease abstraction, compliance, deal points, and more. Begin by importing your document sets. Kira can read, identify, and extract information from almost any format. Then gets to work. In minutes, Kira will process your documents to flag clauses, risks, and information that is significant to you. Use Kira's streamlined interface to quickly summarize key findings. Then export a report in your preferred format. Done. Need to flag information unique to your legal team? Add your own custom information and Kira will automatically flag it in your documents every time. Kira. Join hundreds of smart legal teams supercharging their contract analysis. Start by requesting your demo today at kirasystems.com.
So just another tool to show you the promise of these legal tools. Interestingly, JP Morgan made a statement, I believe it was earlier this year, where they were deploying a similar type of contract tool. And they said that it has the capability of saving over 300,000 hours of lawyer time in terms of reviewing contracts and simplifying diligence on clients. So the promise, the productivity is really, pretty remarkable. What's another use case for the legal profession that's really starting to crop up a lot? It's on the HR side in recruiting, hiring, managing employees. A recent survey by the Society of HR Professionals, SHRM, showed that companies, organizations, they survey a lot of organizations, 79% are using AI in recruitment and hiring, which is a pretty remarkable number. And what we see, for example, in recruitment is we see actually these tools, they're very powerful. They actually can go out on the internet and find people who have posted a job resume or said, I'm looking for a job, analyze their qualifications matched against your job description, and come back to you and tell you, we found this individual, we think they're a pretty good match. Do you want to reach out? So a lot of deep insights in this recruitment tool. And on the hiring side, there are chat bots, and there's actually video platforms that are becoming pretty prominent, where you're actually not even sitting across the table from a person. The person's interviewing to a platform, answering questions, and the platform is analyzing facial gestures. Do they look off to the side too much? And they provide back a lot of insights. Now, you can probably already see the peril in some of these tools and the risk. And I'll give you an example. In February, a job applicant sued Workday, the large HR system, alleging that their job scanning tool was built on discriminatory data. And as an African-American applicant over the age of 40, he was excluded. And that lawsuit's pending in the Northern District of California against Workday, alleging a violation of Title VII. Now, I don't have any opinion as to whether there's merit to that case, but you can see where these tools introduce risk, which we'll talk a little bit more about. That's all the promise. Now the peril for lawyers. And the big peril right now is that we're seeing more and more headlines of lawyers getting in trouble for using AI inappropriately. Probably the most famous one that I'm sure everyone has read about is the lawyer in New York who was engaged in a lawsuit. It was an aviation dispute, a plaintiff suing an airline, and the lawyer used ChatGPT to search for cases. And ChatGPT came back with real case names, real citations, even pin sites, and a description of the case. And he lifted those into his brief and he filed it with the court. The court then came back with an order to show cause, asking, and the order is kind of interesting. It says, we've searched, we can't find these cases. Can you please produce a copy of these cases? And the lawyer had to come back and file a declaration and say, I used ChatGPT. It doesn't look like these cases exist. And this is a real risk with these chatbots. It's called hallucination. And the reason why this occurs is because these platforms, they're not intelligent. They're not human beings who then go and check. They are large language. They're mathematical equations. They are going out to look for the next logical word in a sentence to come back and produce to you the result. And they're looking for an answer. They're not necessarily programmed to come back and say, that doesn't exist, try this, because that involves rational thought. They're not there yet. So this is a big risk in using these tools for things like research and case law. We see some others about, there's some federal courts now in light of that case, ordering lawyers to sign an AI pledge and not use AI in their filings. New York is looking at rules around AI-based evidence. I know California is looking at rules around how lawyers can use AI, but it's all being generated by what I would say is an irresponsible use of AI. Now, there's a responsible way to use it, which we're going to talk about how we do, but these are examples of, where you don't want to end up is in the headlines. On top of those issues, we also have these ethical issues. And the ethical issues are important because they sort of permeate everything around responsible engagement in AI. The four duties, the four model rules from the ABA model rules that I think really impact lawyers around AI are the duty of competence, duty of communication, duty of confidentiality, and the duty to supervise. On the duty of competence, model rule 1.1, that says that lawyers have to provide competent representation, including staying informed on up-to-date technology. And specifically, the comment 8 to Rule 1.1 says lawyers must keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. So this gets back to using AI is great, but you have to understand how the AI is actually operating and what the legal risks are around AI, which I'm going to talk about the legal framework in a moment. That's duty of competence. Duty of communication, you've got to tell your clients if you're using AI. And that's you have a duty to reasonably consult with clients about the means in which objectives are going to be accomplished. If you're going to be using AI to achieve those objectives, how do you get your client's consent around that? And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you can explain how the tool is not resulting in unreasonable risk. You have the duty of confidentiality, which means you have to prevent client data from being exposed to unauthorized third parties. Fairly straightforward duty. However, when you're using these new AI tools and you read the terms, a lot of these AI tools will be sharing data with other third parties, or they will be using the data to train their own models. That's a big risk area. And so you have to ensure that the tools you're using are not training on your client's data, which can implicate the duty of confidentiality, can also risk attorney-client privilege. And then the duty to supervise. This says, you have an obligation to supervise lawyers and non-lawyers who are assisting you, but this also includes non-human assistance. So how do you supervise a smart AI agent who is helping you draft contracts, prepare communications? Well, you can only really satisfy that duty if you know how the product's working, its accuracy, the mitigation tools that you can have in place. So we've got these ethical rules that are layered on top of the legal landscape in the US. And the legal landscape in the US right now, in short, is unsettled around the use of AI. We do not have a federal AI law. We have a lot of activity right now at the federal level in the Senate and the House. In fact, just yesterday, the House held 2 hearings on AI regulation. And what the federal government is struggling with is what's the right approach? Do we completely ban the use of AI in certain fields like healthcare and finance? Do we take a risk-based approach and put in place requirements based on the risk of AI involved, which is a very EU approach? Do we let the market figure it out, which is the approach that the UK is starting to take, in Japan? A lot of high-level discussions happening. We're in discussion with several members of the House and Senate around our white paper and our recommendations, because to give you a preview of what the white paper says, we actually say the future of AI regulation shouldn't be left up to us because the technology is going to exceed our oversight. So if your rule says human beings must ensure AI produces valid results, or organizations must do that before they use it, organizations won't be able to know. They don't know how the AI is built. They'll never get that information. So we talk about grounding rules and technical standards. So there's a lot of discussion happening there. Where we see the most activity that impacts all of you is the White House has issued a call to all federal agencies to enforce existing federal law on the uses of AI. The White House has endorsed a responsible AI approach through the White House Blueprint for AI Rights. There's a new executive order that's going to be coming out this month that you'll see headlines about, furthering that principle out of the White House, setting up rules for government contractors. But essentially what the White House has said is, hey, federal agencies, you guys need to basically take your existing tools and apply it to the use of AI. So we have the FTC, for example, that has come out and said, don't overhype your use of AI. Don't overpromise what it can and can't do. Don't use it in an unfair way. Be clear to people when you're using AI, be clear to stakeholders. So they're using that traditional Section 5 of the FTC Act hammer to go after companies using AI. And we're starting to see enforcement actions by the FTC. They have an open investigation, for example, into OpenAI, asking OpenAI what they're doing with data, how, all the trillions of data that they've trained their model on. How did you ensure that you didn't use children's data, or that you've respected the privacy rights of everybody on the internet? Big questions posed to OpenAI. Well, the FTC, we've seen they're also ordering companies to disgorge data as a penalty. And what that means is they're telling companies, your entire AI model was built on a house of cards. either it's discriminatory data or it's children's data without consent, disgorge the model, disgorge the data. Very significant, hammer, and the FTC has been very vocal about it. The DOJ has come out and said, we're going to enforce Title VII, and our Civil Rights Department is going to enforce the ADA on any misuses of AI. So we go back to that example with Workday. EEOC has been very active for the past year, issuing technical guidance, explaining how AI can result in discriminatory outcomes and therefore a violation of Title VII of the ADA. So this gets back to the hiring tools or using it to make employment decisions. And then there's the CFPB and others talking about financial rights. Now, an important development at the federal level is the Department of Commerce. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, they came out earlier this year with an AI risk management framework that they released. And they said, every company and organization, feel free to adopt this framework, and that will further your ability to be shown to be a responsible user of AI. And that's what we'll talk about sort of at the end here, is about how do you actually implement responsible AI. The states, we also see a lot of activity at the states, and the states are focusing on high-risk areas. So for example, California is adopting regulations around the use of AI in employment. We see states looking at the use of AI in credit applications and in healthcare and making clinical decisions. So the states are starting to generate more legislation. I'll be in Georgia in a couple of weeks talking to their legislature about their desire to be first in the nation with a regulatory framework. And so we're seeing a lot of activity at the state level. Probably we will see more state laws come out, like in data privacy, than a federal approach, just based on the current environment. And we're also seeing state bar associations like New York and California crafting guidelines and rules specifically addressing the ethical obligations and impact on legal professionals. So this is a very, condensed slide. There's a lot of activity in the legal landscape. One additional legal risk that's out there that I want to make sure is on your radar is around copyright infringement. We're seeing a lot of lawsuits come up against OpenAI, Meta, and others by authors, artists, movie makers, claiming that these AI tools that generate images and video and text are pulling from copywritten material, and therefore it's copyright infringement. And a lot of these cases are pending. Now, how does that impact you as a legal professional? If you are using, for example, an AI tool to generate marketing materials like images or social media posts, and you're using a tool that creates an image, and there's a lawsuit that finds that all images created by this tool are pulling from copywritten materials, and therefore it's in violation of federal law, you can see how the risk then trickles down. So it's important to stay ahead of where those lawsuits are heading. My view as an attorney is that those cases they're all still pending. There's a big challenge on the plaintiff side on getting discovery, because they're going to have to prove that the defendants, these tools went out and actually pulled data from copywritten material. But the way these tools are built, the way these models are built, is you don't actually know what it pulled from or where it pulled from. And that's largely because these tools operate a lot like the human brain in terms of, we know neurons fire off and tell me to talk, but we don't quite know how it works. And that's very much how a lot of these large language models were built. So interesting space to watch. That's the ethical landscape, the promise and the peril, the legal landscape. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about, well, how do you actually roll out AI in a responsible way as legal professionals? But before I do, I did want to pause there to see if there are any questions about the legal landscape, the ethical rules, and the new tools on the market and how they're operating before we get into putting in place a program, getting contract provisions in place, and maximizing the opportunity. All right, well, hearing none, if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Let's talk about what responsible AI is and what it looks like. When we think about responsible AI, there are a number of frameworks that are out there in the ether talking about what it means to be responsible AI. The OECD at the international level has released an AI responsibility framework. NIST has a responsibility framework. The White House has a responsibility framework. At Dentons, we've condensed all of those frameworks and all of the principles into what I call the Denton's Responsible AI Framework. And it's really 4 principles. And any use of AI, whether it's very small or whether it's an enterprise-wide tool, should always be viewed when you're analyzing whether it's appropriate, whether it's responsible to deploy. You want to analyze it through these principles. So what are these principles? Well, the first one is AI should be valid, reliable, and robust. This is getting back to that New York lawyer who used ChatGPT to generate fake cases. ChatGPT was generating invalid results that were not reliable. Therefore, if that lawyer and that law firm was employing a responsible AI governance program, they would have paused right there. They would have looked at ChatGPT and said, is it producing valid and reliable results? They would have seen that the research and the news articles indicate that hallucinations are possible. And they would have built in place an acceptable use policy for their lawyers saying, if you use ChatGPT, you can only use it as a starting point, not an end point. You have to verify every piece of information you rely on. And you have to indicate internally to your supervisors that you relied on ChatGPT in generating some of the content. That's sort of how it gets operationalized. Much bigger picture, if you think about enterprise uses of AI and sitting on top of enterprise data, how do you ensure that the results that Microsoft Copilot is generating are reliable? When it's generating a proposed contract based on prior documents, how do you know the output is reliable? This gets to vetting, let's say Microsoft as a company. Well, they have a lot of documentation on their responsible AI program and how they ensure their models have reliable results. Robustness refers to, can this actually operate under a lot of different circumstances and pressures? And that's always the challenge with new software and new technology. Is it reliable? Is it going to operate? What if it scales and there's a ton of users? Do you lose functionality? That's principle number 1. Does it work? How does it work? Is it valid? Principle number 2 is around safety, security, and resiliency. Does it introduce a safety risk? Now, in the legal profession, probably not. When we're talking about safety, we're talking about physical safety, environmental safety, property safety. And when you think about AI in other industries and other verticals, well, the construction industry is using a lot of AI in the creation of building plans. That introduces a physical safety component. Medical use of AI introduces a physical safety component. So safety has to be part of the analysis. How much weight you give safety? As a legal professional, you probably give it very little weight when you're talking about generating content. Security, however, is a critical component, especially for lawyers, because if we're using any of these AI tools on client data that is confidential, how secure is that tool? And we know from the headlines that you're only as secure as your vendors are secure. And if your vendors get hit with ransomware or malicious content, that will trickle into your system. So cybersecurity is a core component. It's not the only issue, but it's a core component when analyzing these tools. The third principle is the toughest one to get your arms around right now with the way AI is built. And that is around transparency, explainability, and interpretability. This is, do you know how the model created the output that it created? Do you know how it works? And can you explain it? This gets back to the ethical obligation of duty of communication to our clients and duty of competence. Well, the big challenge right now with a lot of these large language models, going back to that slide where we had ChatGPT and Microsoft Bing and Anthropic's Claude, all of these chatbots, the nature of the technology is that they are a black box. You actually don't know how they're coming back to generate the result. There was a 60 Minutes interview, I think on last week or it was the week before, with Jeffrey Hinton, who is known as the godfather of AI. It was his experiments at Google that started this whole chain of development. And now he's a big, he's warning about the dangers of AI. And he was explaining that these tools go out and search for answers and search for material, but we don't know how they actually come back. We know that they go out and review trillions of pieces of data, but we don't know why they're putting one sentence after the next. And that's a transparency problem. And so from a responsibility standpoint, you have to say, well, if I'm using the publicly available ChatGPT tool that's accessing data all over the internet, I don't have a lot of transparency into how it's coming back to me. But if I'm using the enterprise tool that's only going into my data, and I feel relatively confident about the data I've given it access to, and maybe that's a very small universe, now I have more confidence from a transparency and explainability standpoint. The final principle is around privacy and around fairness. And this gets to, are we risking data privacy in the use of these tools? And that can be a complicated endeavor. And does this tool create a risk of discrimination or unfair outcomes? Who are the people who may be impacted by this tool? This really comes into play on the HR side. Am I excluding candidates because I'm using a tool that was trained on discriminatory data? There was a famous study a couple of years ago that really generated a lot of the work at the EEOC level, where an AI tool used to scan resumes and make recommendations. It turns out that it was actually taught on top of a bunch of resumes of non-diverse college students with non-diverse hobbies. And so they were basically by name, they were excluding people with ethnic names or names that are not, traditional Western names, whatever it was programmed. So you can see where that risk comes into play. When you're analyzing these tools, you have to look at, well, how was the model trained? And what was it trained on? And your vendors should be capable of answering that question. So these are the principles of a responsible framework. This is the prism that I recommend viewing all of AI through. So what does this look like in action? There are some core components on operationalizing a responsible AI program. And legal professionals are at the tip of the spear in implementing this internally. One is the group that's responsible for analyzing AI through those principles and publishing and enforcing policies needs to be cross-functional and diverse. Because AI impacts HR, business, marketing, reputation, financial, the group that is in charge of approving or identifying or mitigating risk and opportunity needs to also have those viewpoints. You can't just have your security professional running the AI risk management program or your privacy, because they're only viewing it through one lens. And if you looked at it just through the lens of security, you may be ignoring tools that present a tremendous opportunity for your organization. So cross-functional group is important. Adopting policies around those responsible principles, acceptable use policies, standards of acceptable failure rates for different tools. Those are all very important components. Mitigating risk through your contracts. This is probably something that everyone can do right now, and I'll show you some examples of this, is to operationalize responsible AI principles in practice, is looking at the vendors and putting in place contract terms to mitigate the risk of those vendors. And just as we see data processing addendums and security addendums attached to a lot of contracts now, we're going to start to see the AI addendum that talks about AI risk. Finally, and this is true of any area of risk and opportunity, you have to build a culture of AI governance, of responsible AI usage, educating the workforce, educating the teams on what is AI, what's the promise of it, what's the risk, really just what we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. And you're going to see more and more promise of AI. I was participating in an AI discussion last week where one of the speakers said, if AI today was released on all medical records, it would cure cancer in a week. That's the capability, because it can detect patterns and relationships beyond what humans can do. Pharmaceutical companies are making drugs purely with AI at the moment. So we're going to see this trajectory, building this culture of governance and of responsible AI governance internally, so everyone is empowered to identify opportunity and risk, is really critical, because otherwise you'll miss tools and you'll also miss some of the risk. So before I jump into, I'm going to show you some examples of what it means to actually operationalize responsible AI through contract terms. But I want to pause there before we jump into some contract examples to see if folks have any questions about this concept of a responsible framework and responsible principles in action. All right, hearing none, just resolving all issues and questions today on all things AI. One of the biggest, I think, risks is, let's say you decide I'm going to use Harvey AI, or I'm going to deploy the new Lexis AI tool, or I'm going to do Microsoft Copilot for me and 3 other employees. One of the things you have to look at is, well, how do you ensure that that vendor is being responsible themselves? If they're not being responsible, then you're ultimately going to be held to be not responsible by a regulator or bar association. So I like to actually push down to vendors. And if anyone on this call is a vendor, maybe you push back. But a representation that you are only going to be using and deploying AI that is reasonable and trustworthy, and that you have governance in place that aligns with industry best practice, like the NIST AI risk management framework. You can use that as a benchmark. Do you have written policies? Do you have guidelines? Do you have model approval processes to mitigate against risk? Do you have model cards that you can give us? A model card is something that's sort of new right now. And a lot of these AI tools, it's like a nutritional label that they can provide you that explains how the model works, how it was trained, and give you a lot of the information you need to vet it from a responsibility standpoint. So putting in contract, you will give us documentation if we request it. And also, you're not going to use AI to generate material for us unless we tell you to. So these are some of the governance provisions that I start to put into contracts. Another area around AI contracts is on data training. So this is an area that I spoke about before, is when you're using some of these tools, when you look at the terms, they may reserve the right to use any data that you put into the model or make accessible to the model to further train their model and make it better. And that's really how AI works. It gets better with more information, with more inputs. It's constantly revising its game. Well, OpenAI saw that as a problem and a barrier to people actually adopting it in a commercial or professional context. And so they put in into their API terms, we are not going to use any content to improve model performance. So that's an example of a clause that you kind of want to be looking for. You say, oh, they're not going to train. That gets back to my responsibility framework. I've got a little bit of transparency here. I'm mitigating risk on reliability and validity. I'm mitigating risk on privacy, on confidentiality. Okay, I like that. That's good on my responsibility checklist. And on the bottom is a sample contract term. And these are just to give you some examples of what it would look like to say, don't use data to enhance or train. If you leave it silent, that can also be a risk, because if it doesn't expressly tell the provider that they can't use your data to train, I've seen some providers say, well, that means I can train because you would have presumed that I can train on this model. All of these contract risks, by the way, reinvigorate the debate around indemnification and limitation of liability. Specifically on limitation of liability, the waiver of consequential damages that is in every contract. I would have loved to have been at that original meeting where somebody said, this is the language we're going to use for waiving consequential damages, because it's the same everywhere. There's some sort of script somebody wrote. But that waiver becomes important because when you look at case law around consequential damages, what the courts will say is that if the damage is not a result of what the core of the contract is. So if AI is not the core of the contract, of the agreement, AI is just a auxiliary technology being used, well, then any damages resulting from the use of AI could be seen as consequential or special. So you've got to make sure you're carving out AI risk from those waivers. But indemnification and limitation of liability become critically important in this space. Finally, one of the big things that you can do right now when you're looking at deploying a new AI tool is to ask the questions. And this type of diligence, I don't think has to be a new vehicle. You can use existing diligence vehicles like the cybersecurity audit that many of your organizations or law firms already do when you're analyzing a new vendor for services. You're already asking questions about how do you encrypt data? How do you secure data? What's your database setup like? Are you sending data outside of the US? Well, here you have to start asking questions about, well, what type of AI are you using? What's the architecture of the AI? What type of models are you using? Is it a closed universe? Is it open source? Open source models obviously present a number of risks, from confidentiality to security to privacy. How is the model trained? How did you train it to mitigate against discriminatory outcomes? I'll give you an example of where this came up recently. I was working with a client, big retailer, and they've got a lot of data on a lot of customers, and they were basically getting a demo from a marketing company, and the marketing company was showing these remarkable, Cadillac level tools and insights, saying, you give me that customer, I'll tell you if he drank a Dr. Pepper on Tuesday. Like, really deep insights on all these data they have. And one of the features that they offered were that they could make recommendations about, this person's got a real interest in whatever the product is, so target them with this opportunity or this coupon. And everybody, I was like the spoiler of the party, because everybody was so excited and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And I said, well, it looks like all of those recommendations are AI driven. Yes, they are. Oh, we're very proud of it. It's generative AI. It's all the bells and whistles. And I said, well, how was it trained? How do you know that the recommendations you're making about who should receive an offer for what product, that you had a diverse number of individuals in that data pool, so you're not inadvertently creating a risk of discriminatory outcomes or offerings in public services? And they actually didn't have an answer. I was, not a fly-by-night company, but they said, well, we don't know. So I told the client, from a responsibility framework perspective, we have a risk, because you don't know how the model is built. Now, they may still decide to go forward with that tool, but at least they've identified the risk, and they can build in internally controls to mitigate against that risk. That's how you operationalize some of these diligence questions. And more these AI companies should be able to answer these questions. What's the transparency? Can it be customized? How do you ensure security? What are your policies? And if they say, I don't know, I would say move on. There's plenty of other fish in the sea right now in the AI space. And we're really starting to see a separation of companies who get this kind of responsibility framework and those that don't. So, with the few minutes that we have left here, and I do want to leave some time for final questions, what are the key takeaways for us as legal professionals? The number one question, and all lawyers are good at this, ask the right questions. Are we using AI? Do we want to use AI? Who's using it? Where and how? And how you get to this answer is just like you do with data mapping on data privacy, is you just sit down and you talk to people. And you have to set up meetings with people in marketing, in HR, in finance, and say, what are the tools you're using? How are you using it? With that, what I call data mapping or insights, then you're able to identify where the opportunities are. Like, boy, we could really drive home new efficiencies in this group and make people's lives easier, and where some of the risk is. The second tip is, what's your current risk framework for analyzing AI risk? Are you lumping it in with every other software risk? Are you treating it like any piece of software? Or are you treating it differently and looking at it from this cross-functional, cross-risk perspective? The third tip is, just start doing diligence on vendors now. I fall into the camp of techno-optimism. I don't think the sky is falling around AI. I think AI is going to change the way we all live and work for the better. I think we're all going to figure it out. Maybe that's too optimistic, but I think we're all going to figure it out. But right now, roll out those tools, but do your diligence on the vendors and how they're actually rolling out AI. That's something you can do today without a formal program in place. The fourth tip is, keep the human in the loop. This would have saved that lawyer in New York a lot of headaches if there was just a human being in between the result of ChatGPT and the brief that got submitted in the court. If somebody just checked it on Westlaw, it would have never have happened. So the human in the loop's important. And this is where I get back to, use AI right now as a starting point, not an end point. Use it to solve that blank box problem where you're trying to blank slate, you're trying to create a blog post, you're trying to write an article, use AI to get you started. Make it your own, but the starting point is where a lot of the promise is right now. And then finally, start to build out a governance framework that includes written policies, a statement as to what principles are we going to adhere to as an organization? What are we going to promise that when we use AI, we're only going to use it in this way? Do you make that publicly available to your clients, to your customers, that we do use AI? We are leading in that way, but we do it in a responsible way. And here's our responsibility statement. We're starting to see more and more companies and law firms make that statement publicly. What type of policies do you want to adopt? Who's going to own those and roll those out? That's a big debate internally at a lot of organizations. Well, give it to the privacy officer, give it to the security officer. It's really got to be, we're starting to see a new role come up in companies called chief AI officer or responsible AI officer. And we're starting to see companies like IBM and MasterCard actually creating these roles because it is so unique in the governance ecosystem. But I really think that's the secret sauce, is at least saying that when you are rolling out AI, you're doing so in a responsible way. I know with that, I'll go to Molly. There's a question that came up in the chat from the audience asking, how do you handle SaaS providers who use third-party AI like AWS in their products and don't want to rep or warrant the third-party AI in their contracts? That's where, when you go back to this responsibility principle, how much risk are you willing to take in knowing that Amazon is behind the AI? And that's where you have to go beyond the contract. And you have to look at, well, what has Amazon said about their responsibility principles? And do they have a responsible AI committee looking at the models and vetting their vendors? Microsoft, for example, has a ton of material for you to read to learn about how their process works. And that sometimes can give you the assurance. But if you're dealing with a smaller player, you may not get that answer. So you oftentimes are not in a position to negotiate, obviously, with larger players. And that's just the nature of contracting with the larger players in this space. But understanding what they're doing and understanding how the models work, I think, gets you pretty far in that discussion. So Molly, with that, I'll turn it back to you. Now we have 1 minute left on the clock, and happy to answer any additional questions from the audience.
Thanks so much for that, Peter. I'll give a quick shout if you didn't see it. I did just drop the Future of Global Governance, AI Governance document that Peter mentioned. I dropped a link to that in the chat. If you're interested, do grab that. I've scanned it myself. It's really, really well done. But yeah, I know we're running out of time if there is a quick question. Otherwise, I do just want to say, Peter, thank you so much for joining us today, for putting all of this together, and to everyone on the Dentons team for helping make these connections and bring this conversation. I know this is not the end, but hopefully everybody got some really valuable points to move forward with.
Thanks, Molly. I appreciate the invite.